All right, 10 of the worst deadlift mistakes that a whole lot of people are making, and man, are people making mistakes 7, 8, and 10 specifically. Mistake number 1, too wide of a grip. Remember, for a deadlift, you want a relatively narrow grip. You want it wide enough that it's on the knurl, the grippy part of the bar, but beyond that, you want it pretty much as narrow as it can be without having your hands drag up your legs. The wider you go on your grip, the shorter, effectively, in the vertical sense, your arms become, and that is never an advantage in the deadlift. You've got to bend over further, you've added on extra range of motion to the top of the deadlift, so have a relatively narrow grip. Mistake number 2, this goes right along with mistake number 1, and that is too wide of a stance. You also want a fairly narrow stance in the deadlift because you want a narrow grip in the deadlift. As you start taking a wider stance, your hands have to go further and further out. We're talking about the conventional deadlift here. The sumo deadlift is a whole other topic entirely. So take a stance that permits you to have the grip that you want. It's going to be a pretty narrow stance. Generally speaking, your heels are going to be directly underneath your hips. Your toes are going to be pointed out maybe 10 to 15 degrees. Mistake number 3, lifting in squishy shoes, deadlifting in squishy shoes. In general, we always recommend that people lift in lifting shoes. In other words, really shoes with a really solid sole. That is the most important aspect of a lifting shoe. Now, if you really don't like the heel on a lifting shoe, for the most part, it's really a non-issue. But if you really don't like the heel on a lifting shoe, you can certainly deadlift in something like a deadlift shoe or a flat or something like that. But you don't want to lift in anything that has a compressible sole. Don't lift in chucks. We can disagree on this. We can still be friends. But my recommendation is don't lift in chucks. They're squishy. Don't lift in running shoes. Don't lift barefoot. Come on, just lift in some shoes that give you some support. Lift in rigid shoes. Number 4, not using chalk. You got to use chalk on a deadlift for the same reason that rock climbers, that gymnasts use chalk. It's used for friction so you can hang on to things better. Hugely important in the deadlift. Number 5, in the similar vein, is talking about chalk, not using the correct grip. You can double overhand your grip on the deadlift for a while, but not very long. Within probably a month of starting to train, you either need to be using a hook grip, or you need to be using a mixed grip, also known as an alternate grip or a switch grip, or you've got to be using straps. Grip will become a compromising issue. Don't ever let yourself miss a deadlift or even have a bad deadlift because of your grip. Mistake number 6, not setting the back. We want to get the back set in flat, in rigid extension. So push your belly down between your thighs, squeeze your chest up, get some wrinkles in the back of your shirt. You're not looking for an overextended back, in other words, an arched back. But if you struggle with having a flexed back, in other words, your back is kind of rounded, you're probably not going to have an arched back anyway. So you can actually probably try to have an arched back just to get a flat back. If you don't have a coach, then by default, you are your own coach. So you've got to watch for this on camera. Make sure that you're getting your back set. Mistake number 7, yanking or trying to jerk the bar off the floor. Even if you get your back set in rigid extension, if you try to yank that thing off the floor, if you try to grip it and rip it, some of the dumbest deadlift advice ever given in the history of mankind, you are not going to be able to keep your back set against a heavy load. If you can keep your back set, congratulations, that just wasn't a heavy load, all right? So pull it smoothly off of the floor. Heavy weights cannot be pulled quickly off of the floor. If they could, they wouldn't be heavy. So if you're trying to pull it quickly, you're just going to pull things out of place. And usually the first thing that's going to give is the setting of your back, the extension that you provided in earlier in the deadlift setup. So keep that back set, pull smoothly off the floor. Mistake number 8, trying to quote unquote stand up right away. Now obviously the deadlift, you are going to stand up, right? We get vertical eventually, we finish the lift in a completely vertical position. But when people think about standing up, what they're usually thinking about is getting their back angle vertical, getting their torso vertical right away. If you are trying to do that right away on the deadlift, you are going to end up pulling around your knees. Your knees aren't going to start straightening right away like they should. So think of it this way. Do not think of the deadlift as a standing up exercise. Think of the deadlift as a stay the heck leaned over exercise. In other words, don't stand up as early as you think. Instead, focus on the knee extension. Focus on pushing the floor away. Yes, there is hip extension right away. In other words, actually, your back angle will start getting a little bit more vertical from the get-go. But don't focus on that. Don't think about standing up right away. Instead, think about pushing the floor away, leg pressing the earth away from you, straightening the knees. Those are all excellent cues to start the deadlift. Mistake number 9, bad lockout at the top of the deadlift. Now, for starters, make sure that you lock out with your breath held. Breath is support, all right? You can hold your breath until the bar is back on the floor. But usually the mistakes that we're talking about here with a bad lockout is either an incomplete lockout, either your knees are bent or your hips are not fully extended. So in other words, you're not standing up all the way. Remember, your hips should be totally open, your knees should be straight, your shoulders should be behind the bar. Or if it's not an incomplete lockout, it's kind of an overdone lockout. Somebody is overdoing the top position. They're leaning back at the top. You don't want that either. You don't want that overextended position at the top. And what often happens there is your knees will rebend when you get into that position. So now you no longer have a completed deadlift anyway. And mistake number 10, extremely common, setting up too far away from the bar. When you walk up to the bar, set up with your shins, when you're standing vertically, with your shins 1 inch away from the bar. This will put the bar right over the middle of your foot. That's the strongest position from which to pull. Throughout the rest of the deadlift setup, do not let yourself move that bar. Don't let yourself move the bar when you bend over to grab the bar. Don't let yourself roll the bar forward or backwards when you bend your knees to bring your shins to the bar. And don't let yourself move that bar when you squeeze your chest up to set your back. A lot of people, when they squeeze their chest up to set their back in extension, they will consciously or subconsciously drop their hips. When they drop their hips, their knees bend more. When their knees bend more, their shins go forward. When your shins go forward, that bar goes forward. So keep your hips up when you squeeze your chest up so that bar stays over the middle of your foot. 400 pounds over the middle of your foot can be a challenging lift. 400 pounds 1 inch, 2 inches in front of the middle of the foot may be an impossible lift. Hope these help you get stronger and live better.